So I'm going to try to talk for about 30 minutes or a little bit more about aging and give you a slightly different perspective perhaps than Mikhail, but we have very much the same ideas in general, I think. But I want to keep it as short as possible because I want to open the floor for questions. So please hold your questions because we don't have a translator who can hear them until after my talk. But then ask as many as you like. I want to give you some statistics about the world in terms of life expectancy, and I'm sorry I'm standing in the way. Perhaps if I stand here, is this okay? Yeah. Okay. Life expectancy is going up dramatically throughout the world. This is on the left is the average life expectancy. Let's see if the pointer is not going to work. So on the left, this is the average life expectancy in 1970.
You can press maybe.
Yes, I will.
Sorry. Something like this.
Yeah, I will. Perhaps, okay. So this is average life expectancy in 1970, and this is how it's changed over a 40-year period. So you can see that the two longest lived countries in 1970 were Japan and United States at 75. Japan has gone up over 10 years in life expectancy in this 40-year window. So in a sense, what that means is that you're getting a 25% return on investment. So for every 4 years you can expect to live 1 year longer. You'll notice that the curves for Japan and the United States diverge. And this tells you a lot about how lifestyle and environment impacts life expectancy, and I'll come back to that. So the United States is doing a very poor job of controlling lifestyle, where Japan is a much healthier lifestyle. Thank you. Can you see?
No.
I'll just point. No, this is fine. This is great. Yeah. It's the screen, I think. Yes. And then other countries in the world are catching up quickly. So, for instance, Chile, the average life expectancy was 67 in 1970, and it's gone up to above the United States now. And also countries like Turkey have gone up dramatically. Really everywhere in the world, the life expectancy curve is going up.
What about Russia?
I'll come to Russia. So here's the story for the United States. And there's two metrics on here. There's the one we all know about, life expectancy, but there's the one we all really care about, which is healthy life expectancy, or health span. So males have gotten 4 years of increased life expectancy in the US in the last 20 years, and females too. Don't be confused, women live longer than men, but the men are catching up. The problem is the number in red is not going up as fast as the life expectancy number. And this is the problem, because if many people are living to an older age, this puts an immense challenge on the economic system. If these people are retired and they have multiple chronic diseases, the cost of healthcare goes up dramatically. If you can make this number, healthy life expectancy, go up at the same rate as life expectancy, then it's an economic victory, because you're keeping people healthy longer and they can work longer, they can function longer in society. If this number is going up more dramatically than this number, that means you're keeping people sick longer, and we've got a problem. And I'll talk about why that is. I also want to break things down a little bit in the United States, because this is where the best statistical data is. Each of these little boxes is a county in the United States. The longest lived counties are in blue, and the shortest lived counties are in red. And there's about a 15-year difference in life expectancy from one county, the longest to the shortest. So if you're living in San Francisco or Denver or the East Coast, you're doing quite well. If you're living in the South, things are not going so well. So you can then correlate this data to other types of data to try to get an idea for what's happening. So let's first look at obesity. So I don't know if all of you can see this curve, but frankly, I can't tell the difference between these two graphs. They're really looking at different things. This is life expectancy and this is obesity, but they almost completely overlap. So what that tells us is that the lifestyle choice, that what we eat and how much we eat, is having a huge impact on how long we live in the United States. But this is only part of the story. There's another statistic that's even more meaningful, and that's poverty. And again, if you look at poverty and life expectancy, there's a very strong correlation. Now, why is that? One of the main reasons is diet. In the United States, for 50 years ago, it used to be that the wealthiest people ate the best diet because things like fruits and vegetables and healthy foods were available to the wealthy. I'm sorry, I'm backwards. 12 hours off my time. Let me try again. So it used to be that the poor, the people that did not have much money, the cheapest food was the healthiest food. So it was the vegetables you grew in your garden, the fruits, things like that. But now, the cheapest food you can get is the worst food for you. It's fast food. It's potato chips, processed food, things that are high in simple sugars and very bad for you. So we now have a situation where people with more money tend to eat a healthier diet than people with less money. And that's one of the reasons there's this correlation between obesity, poverty, and life expectancy. So all of this to say that what we choose to do has a huge impact on how long we're going to live. And just a brief mention of diabetes, because this is a global pandemic on our hands, and it's having a dramatic effect on life expectancy. That's why the U.S. curve is flattened. Currently, 60% of the U.S. is overweight, 30% of the U.S. is obese. Russia's not far behind, I'm sorry to say. Diabetes is going up dramatically. So if you look at a country like Saudi Arabia or the Arab Gulf in general, in 5 years, 1/3 of the people in that whole region will have type 2 diabetes under the current statistics. So the export of processed food, of cheap food, of high-calorie food is having a global impact that is going to be hard to measure the significance of. But we're talking about aging. So let me give you just a few more statistics. This graph shows on the y-axis the average life expectancy at birth, and on the x-axis the amount of money per capita that's spent on healthcare. And so you can see that in general, the more money a country spends trying to keep people healthy, the longer people live. That seems to make sense. This is a pretty straight line. Some countries do much better than others. So here's Japan and here's South Korea. They're very efficient in terms of the money they spend. Other countries not so well. So some of you might have been cheating and looking at my slides before I gave my talk. And if you did that, you can't answer this question. But I want to ask you, which dot do you think the United States is? Does anybody want to guess? Actually, I kind of cheated too, because I didn't put the U.S. on the slide. So here's the U.S. We spend 2.5 times per capita on healthcare compared to the rest of any other country in the world, and we get very little return for it. Life expectancy in the U.S. is 50th in the world, 50. So that tells you that it's not the money you spend, it's how smart you spend the money. And I'll tell you why there's a problem. By the way, this is Russia. So it's pretty clear what the problem in Russia is, that more money needs to be spent. This is a fairly complicated slide, but it's quite simple. So DALYs stands for Disability Adjusted Living Years. So this is the amount of time a person spends in a disabled state, in a non-functional state. And this tells you a lot about the problem with healthcare. So the green, this is the United States data, is accidents and falls and things like that. The red is infectious disease. So we talk about infectious disease like HIV. You can't even find that on the slide. It's very small. The blue, there's a lot of words in there. So let me just tell you what some of them are. Heart disease, stroke. This box here is cancer. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, osteoarthritis, osteoporosis. But they really could take all of these words off the blue and just put one word in, and that's aging. Because aging is the biggest risk factor for almost every disease in this blue box. So when you think about how we try to treat people, we consider aging a natural process, and all of these diseases terrible catastrophes. So when you get sick, when you get one of these diseases, you go to the hospital, and especially in the US, we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars keeping you sick longer. So we're very good at keeping you alive when you get sick. What we're bad at is curing those diseases. And what we don't do at all is prevention. We do nothing to keep you healthy. We just wait till you get sick. So the major premise of my case today is that we need to be doing health care, not sick care. And that means using medicine in a revolutionary way to try to keep people healthy as long as possible and try to make them live long, but live healthy long. And if we do that, it's going to be more efficient than the sick care approach we're taking. And also, it's a much better quality of life. You want to be healthy. You don't want to be alive but sick. Russia's not that different. The blue box here is Russia, and heart disease is bigger. There are more problems with accidents and falls and self-harm, and there's a slightly bigger problem with infectious disease, but it's the same thing. The blue box is the dominating box. So I think I took my slide out, so I'll just tell you the data for Russia. Russia life expectancy has not gone up in the last 20 years. It's flat. It's almost zero. And so right now, especially if you're a man, life expectancy in Russia is among the worst in Europe. And so this is, again, a lifestyle choice. There's a huge problem with alcoholism in the male population in Russia, and that's keeping life expectancy low. So life expectancy for men in Russia is a little bit over 60, and it's in the mid-70s for many other countries. For women, life expectancy is 72, so it's much closer. So this is the general idea here, that instead of picking a disease, in the US we like to declare war on things. And so we do that in healthcare too. So in the 70s, Nixon declared war on cancer. We're going to beat cancer. And then in the early, about 6 years ago, Obama declared the same war again. We're going to declare war on cancer. So what that tells you is it's not working that well. Sure, we're doing a better job of keeping people alive when they get cancer, but we haven't cured the disease. It's a very difficult disease to cure. And now recently we're declaring war on Alzheimer's disease. That's one of those little bitty boxes in the disability adjusted living years. Our argument is if we're going to declare war on anything, it should be aging. Because if we can slow aging, we can prevent or protect against all of these diseases at the same time, rather than picking one at a time. So if you cure all cancer, for instance, in people over the age of 50, if I could snap my fingers and do that, average life expectancy would go up 3 years. Why? Well, 2/3 of people don't die from cancer anyway, so it doesn't make any difference. And the third that do are old, and they get sick and they die from something else 10 years later. So the average doesn't go up very much. But I'm going to show you interventions in mice that extend life expectancy by 30%. And that they keep animals healthy 30% longer too. And the reason is they're targeting aging. So this is the institute that I'm the director of, the Buck Institute. I'll just give you a couple slides on it. It's very unique in that it's not just doing any medical research. It's not doing medical research only on one disease, but it's doing medical research on what we call geroscience. What we're trying to do is understand the aging process and how the aging process contributes to diseases. So about half of our faculty work directly on pathways that are linked to aging. Like, I'll talk about some of them, like dietary restriction or mitochondrial function in cells. And then we have people that have expertise on individual diseases like Alzheimer's disease or breast cancer, cardiovascular disease. But it's really this interface that we want to understand. Why do you get sick when you get old? It seems obvious that people, when they think about it, they think, well, that's a natural process. But why? Why does it happen? We want to understand that. We also focus on stem cell research, which I'm not going to talk much about today, but I'm happy to answer questions about. And the idea is to link together different things to have an impact. So our impact is we want to extend health span, and we want to reform healthcare so that we're doing healthcare instead of sick care. And to do that, we have a lot of things going on. At the first and foremost is basic research and translational research. We're also participating in wellness programs, clinical trials, educating the public, stem cell banking, and other kinds of therapeutics. And so we feel like this revolution has to happen. We have to have another healthcare revolution where we're doing healthcare. And this is the goal. This is the most important slide, I think, for you to take. So take away. So if you imagine your life is this top line, the blue line. You're born, you're okay for a while, you get sick, it gets worse, and then you die. So, first of all, let me say I know your lives are much more enriched than that. That you enjoy many things, maybe you have kids or grandparents that you like being with, and it's wonderful. So I know I'm simplifying. But when we ask people, particularly in the United States, when we ask people, do you want to live longer? Many people say, no, I don't want to live longer. And you say, why? And they say, well, I look at my grandmother and she's 85. She's taking 18 pills a day. She's in pain all the time. She has trouble getting out of bed in the morning. Who wants to live longer like that? And what they're imagining is this, that you're going to be healthy for the same amount of time, but you're going to be sick longer. What I want to argue is that that's not what aging research is trying to do. That's what we're doing now. We don't do prevention. You don't go. Maybe you don't even go to the doctor until something goes wrong. Then you go to the doctor, and then the doctor spends a lot of money trying to keep you alive. And we do. So you live longer, but you live longer in a state of morbidity. The promise of aging research is very different. It's to extend health span. It's to make this line longer. And we can already do this in animal models. And I think we're already doing it in humans, and I'll explain why. Ultimately, we'd like to do this, where you're healthy for a very long time, and then you get sick and die quickly. Or maybe not die at all. I know Misha wants to do that, but we want to take baby steps before large steps. But I don't know that we can actually do this in animal models very well yet. So while this is the goal, I'm not sure we're there yet. But here, we can at least do this in mice. By the way, centenarians are like this. People that live to 100 years of age tend to be extremely healthy for a very long period of time. And then they fall down the stairs or something like that and break their hip, and things go very quickly downhill, which is a sad thing. But when you look back at it, my grandmother died at 101. She was healthy all the way out till 100. She drove a car till her mid-90s. I don't know if you do bowling much here in this country, but she was a champion bowler, and she bowled a 232 game when she was 92. So that's what you want. You want healthy, functional lifespan. And I think it's achievable. So the answer, can we extend human health span? There's a question of feasibility, and I'm going to hit that point very hard today. But there are also problems. There are regulatory issues. Let me explain why. So the Food and Drug Administration approves clinical trials in drugs in the United States. And when you register your trial, you have to choose a disease indication to register. You have to pick cancer or something like that. Well, they don't consider aging a disease. So you can't do a trial directly for aging. And even if you could, imagine how difficult that would be. We're going to start with people when they're 60 years old, give them a drug and see if they live longer. I don't think we want to wait to find out that answer before we start giving this to humans. So that's a problem. And there's a massive resource problem right now. So in the United States, the National Institute of Health, the money that's given to academic research has been flat for 14 years. And so with the inflation, that means that there's only about 2/3 as much money to do research now as there was 14 years ago. This is dramatically impacting the research that goes on. On top of that, the NIH only spends 0.9% of its budget on aging. Remember, this is the biggest risk factor for every disease they care about, almost, and they spend less than 1% on it. So there's a
Healthcare or
no, on research.
research? Okay.
Yeah. This is a big conceptual problem that needs to be changed. So if aging is not considered a disease, what do you do? So I can tell you what the kinds of things that are happening. First of all, companies that have started, and this is one company, Certrus, that was a lot of people know about. They found drugs in animal models based on their ability to extend lifespan. But then when they wanted to test the drugs in humans, they chose diseases. So they chose multiple myeloma and psoriasis and a whole range of other diseases that they thought that the drugs that affect aging would protect against. And I'm going to show you a trial like this with a rapamycin in a minute to illustrate what it looks like. The other thing you can do is you can define new diseases. So the FDA doesn't consider sarcopenia, muscle wasting with aging, that doesn't consider sarcopenia a disease. So if you can get the FDA to think about these other kinds of diseases that are closely linked to aging, that's another way to think about a trial. And then finally, and perhaps the best way, is to have biomarkers of aging. So by this I mean hopefully mostly molecular markers in the body that you can measure how old someone is. So we know what your chronologic age is, how long you've been alive. But it's very hard to measure your biologic age because all of us are aging at different rates. And so if you take 5 people that are 40 years old, they're all chronologically 40 years old, but biologically they may be everything from 30 to 50. And we need to figure out how to measure that. If we could measure that, then we could take drugs and give people drugs and see if you return back that biologic clock. And that ultimately is probably the best way to get drugs tested. And there's a lot of progress being made here that I can answer questions about if anybody's interested. We have to get over this sick care money cycle that we're doing because it's a major problem. First of all, pharma likes to make money. That's okay, that's fine. But the problem is that forces them into trying to look at diseases rather than aging. And so if you look at what the promise of aging drugs or interventions that affect aging really is, it's really this health span, purple line, keeping people healthy longer. It's probably also going to prevent disease. If I give you some drug when you're 50 that slows aging, it's going to delay the onset of cancer, so that would probably work. But whether a drug after you're sick is going to make you better again by targeting aging, we have no idea. That's a different question. Once you get sick, it's a different problem. Prevention and treatment are 2 very different things, and aging is more targeted toward prevention. But when you look at what pharma companies do, they love treating disease because they're short clinical trials. You can make a lot of money off those trials. Disease prevention trials are much more expensive because they have to go on for multiple years and they cost a lot of money. And then pharmaceutical companies are just now beginning to think about targeting aging. So this is the problem. We have to get this pyramid flipped over and looking like this pyramid if we're going to really think about how to develop drugs. There are 2 other problems. In the U.S. particularly, doctors are not reimbursed by how much they keep you healthy. They're reimbursed by how many procedures they do. So they love sick people because you can make a lot of money off sick people. I'm exaggerating. I know many MDs in the U.S. and throughout the world, and almost all of them became doctors because they want to help people. So their intentions are good, but there's a perverse incentive. The incentive is to do procedures rather than keep people healthy. And up until recently in the U.S., there's been no reimbursement for prevention. So if I have a perfect prevention program that convinces you to have exercise, the right diet, and I can't get reimbursed for that. So it's very difficult to incentivize true prevention. So we need to solve these problems. And then there's the public awareness problem. People don't understand aging research, as I said. They think it's about keeping you sick longer when it's really about keeping you healthy longer. The anti-aging market right now is about $4 billion a year. People are making $4 billion selling the public things that slow aging. Most of it isn't tested at all. It's non-scientific. And probably most of it isn't even effective. Even supplements, when you think about it, most of the supplements you buy in the store don't actually have much of the actual chemical that you're trying to get. So there's very little regulation on this market. And this is unfortunate because it makes people skeptical about the real aging research. And so this is a problem. And then there's not much support for investment in the field, as I mentioned. But things are changing. This is an article in one of the most popular American magazines, The Atlantic, and it asks the question, what happens when we all live to be 100? And this is another article in New Scientist, and the main point of this article is that the chairman of Novartis, one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world, came out publicly and said, we're going to start thinking about aging. And we're going to think about the TOR pathway, which I'll talk about in a second. So things are beginning to change. I really believe that the challenge when you create a revolution like this is you keep pushing and you keep pushing, and everybody pushes back. And then eventually you get over a barrier, and then everything seems obvious. So we need to get over that transition point, and I think we're getting to that point in aging research. So let's talk about the agents that extend lifespan. These are all things that are known to extend lifespan in animal models. There are behavioral interventions on the left and small molecule interventions on the right, or drugs. We know for 80 years now that if you restrict calories in mice and rats, they live quite a bit longer. They live 30% longer. So what would that mean in a human? Well, someone my size is supposed to be eating 2,200 calories a day. If you do calorie restriction, you would, cut down the amount of calories to about 1,500 calories a day, 1,500. Nobody wants to do that, but the chances are, if you did it right, it would probably work in human population. Now, there's a related topic which is called intermittent fasting. And what that means is you eat your normal diet for most of the time, but then periodically you fast and you don't eat. And this shows a tremendous amount of promise as well in animal models. And I think it will be easier for humans. So you may have heard of something called the 5-2 diet, where for 5 days of every week you eat your normal diet, but 2 days a week you pretty much eat just water and a tiny number of calories. This shows very good, when you look at the clinical trials on this, it dramatically enhances your metabolism. It makes your metabolism younger. And so this is something that might work, and people are now developing diets that mimic fasting. So you might say for the most of the month you eat your normal diet, but then for 5 days a month you eat a specific diet that's very low calorie. So you get some calories, but it's below what you normally need, so it's a fasting-like diet. And the clinical trials on these kinds of diets look very good as well. Now, I want to re-emphasize that if I'm an American male, I should be eating 2,200 calories a day. I'm eating 3,800 calories a day on average. So it's 3,800. So instead of calorie restriction, we're doing over-nutrition instead, which is really a disaster. So it's much better in Russia. The Russian man, my son, is only eating 3,600 calories a day. So it's bad everywhere. Exercise is, we know this works. It extends average median life expectancy dramatically. It's a little bit more unclear about maximum life expectancy, but if you want to stay healthy as long as possible, some combination of endurance exercise and resistance exercise that you can sustain is critical. And the key for behavioral interventions is all about sustainability. Anybody can go on a diet for a week, but you need to find something you can incorporate long-term in your lifestyle to have the benefit. But I want to focus mainly on small molecules. So there have been several. One of them is rapamycin, which I've worked on a lot. I've actually worked on most of these at one point or another. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Metformin and NSAIDs. NSAIDs are non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So almost all of you have probably taken them. Ibuprofen, aspirin, naproxen, and there are many others that you might have taken. And then there are a couple other things that I'll just touch on at the end. STACs, S-T-A-C-S, is sirtuin activating compounds. And so one of these is resveratrol, and you may have heard about that. So you can ask me questions about that if you like. So this is the data, the next slide, for rapamycin. So this is called a dose response curve. So here are male mice and female mice in the control population in blue, and this is a survival curve. So if you look at this survival curve, you can see that 50% of the animals live to 900 days of age. That's how to read these curves. And the maximum lifespan was about 1,200 days of age. That's about over 3 years. It's about 40 months is typically a maximum lifespan. So as you go up in rapamycin concentration, the animals live longer and longer and longer. So at the highest dose in red, the females live 30% longer. By the way, both median and maximum is extended. And the males live about 20% longer. This is a pretty dramatic effect for one drug. And we don't even know if it's the maximum because this is the highest dose. If you went to an even higher dose, the animals might live even longer than that. We don't know. So it's possible to change the rate of aging. We know that. The question is how to do it effectively in humans. Now, rapamycin has side effects, and this is its problem. So this is a clinically approved drug. People already take this drug. They take it for kidney disease, for rare forms of cancer, and a couple other reasons which I can talk about. And the problem is that it causes some metabolic problems like glucose intolerance, insulin resistance, and dyslipidemia, so high levels of lipids. And this is the 3 different versions of rapamycin that are currently on the market. I'm not going to go through this whole list. They're all the same. They all cause more or less the same side effects. Actually, the main reason that people stop taking rapamycin is something called mucositis, which is an irritation of the lining of the mouth. And so it prevents them, it's very painful and it prevents them from eating. And so they stop taking the drug. I have to say that all of these side effects are reversible. If you stop taking rapamycin, everything improves again. So while there are significant side effects for the drug, there's usually not long-term toxicity that comes with it if you stop. So everybody looked at these. I'm going to stay with this slide for just a second. Everyone looked at this drug and they said, well, that's great. It slows aging. So what? You're never going to give this drug to healthy people because of the side effects. You know, we worry a lot about causing harm in people by giving them drugs. And if you're giving a drug to someone who has terminal cancer, you're willing to take more risk because those people are going to die anyway if the drug's not effective. If you're talking about healthy people, then everyone says, no, we want to be very careful with them because the risk is very high. We're taking a healthy person. If we make them sick, that's a disaster. So the clinician said, you're never going to do a trial in healthy people with rapamycin. Well, Novartis didn't listen to them, and they did it anyway. This is a study in New Zealand looking at healthy people over the age of 65. Now remember, you can't look at life expectancy directly. The trial takes too long. So what they did is they tried to pick a property of aging, and they chose the response, the decline in immune function with aging. So they gave people influenza shots, and they looked at how they responded to those shots. Do they mount a proper immune response that protects them against the flu or not? So we tell people as they get older, it's really important to go get your flu shot. And that's true. However, what we don't tell them is that when you get older, you don't respond to the shot that well. So when you get a flu shot when you're 20, your body mounts a very efficient response to the vaccine, and you're generally protected against the flu virus. When you're 80, your body mounts a very poor response to the vaccine, and it may not protect you. So that was the idea, to give people low, medium, and high doses of rapamycin and look at how they respond to influenza vaccination. So first of all, they found that at the low and medium doses, there were no side effects above background. So they could find doses of this drug that were low and did not cause problems. The important point is that all 3 doses improved the immune response. So when those individuals were challenged with flu, they were resistant. And actually, they also improved response to heterologous virus. That means that the body was able to mount a defense against different variants of the flu that weren't in the vaccine. So the conclusion was that they not only, they actually reversed what you call immune senescence in these aging individuals and made them younger for that property. That's what you would expect of an aging drug, I believe. So what we're doing in my lab, and we've actually started a company to do this, is to modify rapamycin because we want to get the efficacy without the side effects. So rapamycin inhibits this protein called TOR, and this is an inhibition curve. And what we've done is figured out ways to alter the drug. I'm not going to go into detail about this, you can ask me, so that it still has all the efficacy we want toward this TOR complex, but it doesn't have the side effects, at least in animal models. And so we're testing this preclinically right now, and we hope to go into the clinic with this. And this kind of a drug may be very effective against aging because the risks are lower. Metformin. Millions of people take metformin. It gets given to people when they're early stage diabetes diagnosis. So sort of a early stage metabolic disease. The trade name in the US is glucophage. I apologize, I should have looked up what the trade name is here. I'm sure it's not that. What?
Many names.
Many names. It's FDA approved for not only type 2 diabetes, but for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And one of the main ways it works is it suppresses glucose production in the liver and improves peripheral glucose uptake. So you make less glucose, and your muscles predominantly do a better job of using the glucose. And so the levels of glucose in your blood goes down, and it protects against diabetes. I'm simplifying, but I'm not going to go into this. My main point is that metformin, among other things, inhibits this same protein, TOR, that rapamycin inhibits. So what we're starting to find is that the drugs we find that impact aging and the genetic mutations in mice that we find impact aging are starting to converge on certain pathways. The TOR pathway is one of them. So what about metformin? So here's worms, one of the organisms that people study. They're tiny microscopic worms that live about 2.5 weeks. You can have millions of them in your lab, and they age really quickly, so they're a nice organism to work with. They're very cheap and fast. Metformin extends lifespan there. Fruit flies. Everybody knows what fruit flies are, the little flies. Metformin extends lifespan there. Fruit flies live about 3 months. So they tested it in mice. Some of the this is a study by Rafa de Cabo at the National Institute of Aging. But also studies have been done by Dr. Anisimov here in Russia on metformin. This is the mouse data from the National Institute of Aging study in the US, and it doesn't look that interesting to me. It does extend lifespan, but it's only about 5%. So I looked at this and I went, not so interesting. But then they did a human retrospective study that's really exciting that I'm going to tell you about. This is a little bit hard to see, so I apologize for that. And I'm going to take you through this slide slowly. So the researchers were trying to understand mortality associated with diabetes. And so if you get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, your life expectancy is about 8 years shorter than if you don't have diabetes. And in the US and England, you get one of two drugs typically when you're first diagnosed. One is metformin. The other one is sulfonylurea. So it's a class of drugs. And so they wanted to compare how patients were doing on these different drugs. The problem is that to do a comparison, this is a 5-year survival curve. This is the number of people that are alive at 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 years. These are people over the age of 60. And so the problem is that everyone that gets diagnosed gets one of the two drugs or something else. And so what's the control population you're going to compare to? Ideally, you want people that aren't getting drugs, but we can't tell you, no, you can't have drugs because we want to do an important experiment. We have to give you something. So what they decided to do is to compare to people in the same doctor's offices that did not have diabetes. So this is hundreds of thousands of patients. And the red and the black line are the survival curves of the two control groups that don't have diabetes. This is the survival curve of the sulfonylurea group. And again, it shows exactly what you would expect, that people are not surviving as well with diabetes as they do when they don't have diabetes. Here's the important curve, metformin. These patients are actually living longer with diabetes taking metformin than the control population is that's not taking metformin but doesn't have diabetes. What this suggests is the drug is not just impacting diabetes, but it's slowing the rate of progression of many other age-related diseases at the same time and allowing people to live longer. This study's been replicated, it hasn't been published yet, but this study's been replicated by 2 other major hospital groups. So this looks to be true. What does this mean? To me, this means that we need to stop thinking that giving people drugs for aging is this crazy thing that we're never going to be able to do, and acknowledge the fact that we're already doing it. We didn't develop this drug for aging. Metformin was developed decades ago for diabetes. But people are already taking it, and the reason I think it works is you give it to them very early in disease progression, and it targets diabetes, but it also targets the big risk factor for diabetes, which is aging. So you're actually effectively slowing the aging process by giving people this drug. So we're already doing this. If we just focus on how to do aging as opposed to getting lucky by developing drugs for other diseases, then we might be even more effective and dramatically extend lifespan. Complicated slide, don't worry, I'm going to keep it simple. This is data in our lab where we defined a strategy using yeast cells to find drugs that extend lifespan in yeast. And we screened all of the FDA-approved drugs, and these are 2 of the hits we had. Gemfibrozil, which is another diabetes drug that people have been taking for a long time, and ibuprofen. So ibuprofen is one of the most common non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. It's designed to inhibit these enzymes, COX-1 and COX-2, which are the pain enzymes. So you take ibuprofen when you have a headache or when you have pain. But also these drugs have shown promise for a whole range of different diseases, and people take, there's many of them. This is the 4 most common. What about the lifespan data? Here's the data in mice, in male mice, done by the National Institute of Aging. And there's a modest effect. There's about a 5% extension with aspirin only in males. There's no effect in females. This is actually one interesting fact. Almost every intervention, be it drug or genetics, works better in one gender than the other. So rapamycin works better in females. Aspirin works better in males. We have no idea why. We can speculate on that if you're interested. This is a company in China that I have no affiliation with. And what they developed is a transdermal delivery for ibuprofen and aspirin. This is aspirin. So by that I mean you put it on your skin, the drug goes through the skin and it gets absorbed into the bloodstream. Well, for them, it's important because actually we think of these drugs like aspirin and ibuprofen as safe drugs, but that's a little bit not true. For the vast majority of people, if you take low dose, it's pretty safe. But if you take higher doses, it actually does cause side effects often in terms of affecting your liver, your stomach. And so if you are thinking about really targeting aging, you want to get the dose higher, but again, you can't have the toxicity. And this is true for disease as well. So this company was developing these drugs for osteoarthritis. So this is like problems you might have with your joints. And the idea is if you could spray the drug directly on the skin, it would get absorbed locally and get into the cells where it's needed and cause less toxicity in the stomach and the liver because you're not doing an oral delivery route. So they did this experiment in mice just to see what would happen. They took mice and they shaved the back of their necks and they put the drug on and it gets absorbed through the skin. You can only do this in mice on the back because otherwise they lick the drug off. So it's the only place you can deliver. And this curve is actually, I apologize, it's not my data. This is not to scale. So it goes up in months quickly and then goes up very slowly here. So this is a little bit misleading. But the effect was that they extended lifespan by 25%. So we're in the process now of repeating this. And these drugs are in stage 2 clinical trials for chronic diseases of aging. So it might be possible in the near future to actually spray these drugs on and get a much quicker absorption into cells, so higher efficacy with lower side effects. And by the way, ibuprofen has shown that it's protective against Alzheimer's disease in animal models, against Parkinson's disease, and many others. And again, that's what we would expect of an anti-aging drug. It should protect against multiple diseases of aging. So let's come back to this, and I'm going to sum up and finish in the next couple minutes because I want to take questions. I've told you about rapamycin and metformin and NSAIDs, and my main hypothesis here is that we're already treating aging, that we give millions of people millions of men low-dose aspirin already to protect against cardiovascular disease, but it may be impacting aging. We give millions of people metformin for diabetes, but it may be protecting against aging as well. And you can make similar arguments for statins that we give for cardiovascular disease, for beta blockers, and a number of other drugs. And this list is going to keep growing, by the way. This is acarbose. I don't know, does anybody remember about 10 or 15 years ago when they put those potato chips out that they said, these are great, you can eat all the potato chips you want because we have this drug in the potato chips that stops your body from taking up in the stomach, stops your body from taking up the carbohydrates and fats? Does anybody remember those? I don't know if they came out in Russia or not. There was a big fad in the United States and people rushed to the grocery store to buy these potato chips and they started eating them. And that's when you realize the conservation of matter. So if the fats are not taken up into your blood, they have to go somewhere else. And so they cause diarrhea. So people stopped eating them. The drug, by the way, was acarbose. And actually, if you give it to mice, it's reported to extend lifespan by about 25%, only in males for some reason.
Acarbose is against sugar and not against fat.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It affects mainly carbohydrates, but there's a secondary effect of absorption. But it definitely causes the diarrhea. I don't know about in the mice, but it does in humans.
Another drug, I don't remember what's the name. I will tell you later.
Yeah, okay. And this is where resveratrol that you might have, it's a sirtuin activating compound. And there are many other drugs like that they're reported to increase the activity of this enzyme called SIRT1, and that affects aging. But my point is that this is 5 things. There are already others that are not on this slide. This list is going to grow really rapidly. We're going to have 20 or 30 of these kinds of drugs that affect aging in mice. And the challenge is, how do we test them in humans? And how do we find the most rapid way to figure out how to extend human health span? So I gave you a very specific talk today. I talked about longevity and anti-aging approaches to get from here to here with extended health span. But it's really going to take a broad approach. We're going to have to do a better job of primary care and prevention, better job of wellness. Stem cell medicine shows great promise. Feel free to ask questions about that. And we still want to treat disease. I'm not saying that we want to stop trying to develop drugs for disease. If I get Alzheimer's, I'm going to run to the pharmaceutical companies and say, give me something as fast as possible. It's not that this is a bad idea. It's that we shouldn't only be doing that. We need to be focusing on keeping people healthy as well and have a much more holistic perspective. So if we do all of these things effectively, I think what we're going to see is human health span dramatically expand over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And so it's a really exciting time in the field. And everybody causes the problem that we have, the silver tsunami, because by 2050, 20% of the population is going to be over the age of 60 throughout the world. That's global. 40% of Japan is going to be over the age of 65. This is an economic crisis if we don't do anything. If these people are all sick, we've got a big problem on our hands. But we know how to enhance health span. We know where to put the resources. We know how to do the research. And we're learning how to develop the drugs for humans. And if we do that, it's really a golden opportunity. Having this demographic has never been seen before in the human population. And it's nice to have older people around. If you're 30 years old and your grandparents are still healthy enough, they can raise your children. They can continue working. They can volunteer. They can disseminate their wisdom to the rest of society. It's nice to have an older population around, but you have to keep them healthy. And so we need to be focusing on this and not this. So this is the change that has to happen. So that's my last slide. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions. We just have to. Thank you. I have to let the translator come into the room. I have to say that I suspect that the translator did a fantastic job, so we should thank him when he comes into the room. The good thing about simultaneous translation is that when I say things that you agree with, I can take all the credit for that. When I say things you don't agree with, I can blame poor translation for the problem.
Я, скажем так, могу воспользоваться плодами этого согласия, да? Но если вы будете с этими согласны, я скажу, это во всем виноват переводчик.
So I'm happy to take questions.
Отличный вопрос. Brian, who will moderate, you or Michelle will moderate?
I don't care.
Okay,
As long as I get to do the answers, I'm fine.
Если я смогу отвечать на вопросы, то меня все устроит. Тогда мы первый вопрос. First question from me.
That's what I was afraid of.
No, я вот этого и боялся.
Брайан, как ты оцениваешь работы российского ученого
Петра Федичева?
А именно, что на сегодняшний день математика настолько сильна, биоинформатика, что мы можем понять, как воздействовать на геном, чтобы превратить геном стареющего животного в геном нестареющего животного. И будь осторожен при ответе на вопрос, потому что Федичев присутствует.
Yes. So, Dr. Fedojev, can you close your ears for a second? I think that the work that, so this is a company called Quantum, and the work they're doing is very exciting. It's bioinformatics, so the idea is to not look at just one pathway at a time, but to look at all the data that we can collect with people as they age or with animal models as they age, and try to put all of that data together in a computational way to predict the pathways that are impacting aging and the drug and the approaches we can do to slow that process down. So I think if this works, and I think it will, they're going to be able to really define those biomarkers that impact aging that I talked about, and define new strategies to intervene to protect against diseases of aging. So it's very exciting. Is that good? In the back.
Okay, thanks for the nice talk. You have a lot of very exciting slides. But I didn't see scientific links for scientific paper in most of slides. Where I can find them?
Links of papers in what?
To scientific papers,
so
references.
Yeah.
I want to see where
Yeah.
the
We have
references.
some, but not in all slides.
So I can.
Right. Let's do
Yeah.
it this way. If the question, wait a second. If the
You-
question in
you-
English, no, wait a second. If the question is English, you just repeat it, and I will repeat after you. Okay?
Okay, so the question is, can we provide references for the data that's been discussed? And I will do that if you. I will provide my email, and if you contact me, I can send you that information.
Почты, вы сможете со мной связаться.
Second question. Which drugs do you eat now? Do you eat?
Do you take? Which drugs do you take? Вопрос в том, какие препараты вы принимаете. Окей, ясно.
This is a very dangerous
Это очень
question.
опасный вопрос.
I try to do two very radical things.
Я пытаюсь сделать, скажем, две очень радикальных вещи.
I try to eat right and exercise.
Я пытаюсь правильно питаться и заниматься спортом.
But
Но
when I look, one of the questions that I ask myself
вопросов, которые я задаю себе,
is when do I believe this enough where I would start taking drugs?
когда, собственно, понимаю, что нужно начать понимать.
And I'm having a hard time, maybe because I'm getting older, I'm having a hard time convincing myself not to take anything because I think that things like low-dose metformin may be very protective, even though I don't have diabetes. So I think we're coming to a point where we're going to start encouraging people to take drugs in the near future, but it's not there yet. The big problem with metformin is we believe now that it's protective against aging in people with diabetes. What we really don't know yet is whether it would have that same effect in people that don't have diabetes because they have very different metabolism than diabetics. I suspect it will, but we don't know that yet. So the more research needs to be done, but it's very promising. Yeah. Yes.
Brian, about this life expectancy graph
Yeah.
on one of your first slides.
Yeah.
It is not an exponential graph. It is not even
Yeah.
an x equals y graph.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible to change the law?
There's always a mathematician in the room.
Такая аудитория, как правило, всегда есть математик.
I think what's possible in the long term is startling. But my goal, I represent a very prominent research institute, and my goal is to convince people that it's possible to do things to slow aging. And I believe once people are convinced of that, then they will demand more and more and more. So I don't think my goals are very different. I think that huge things can be accomplished, but I think it's important to demonstrate small things first, because that's what we can do right now, and to get people to believe in the approach.
Thank you.
Наши собеседники поверили в возможность дальнейшей работы, возможность больших результатов.
Yes.
Сейчас есть много исследований, в том числе в Nature была опубликована работа по переливанию крови мышам, и есть другие работы, показывающие, что в крови может содержаться некоторый неизвестный пока науке фактор, определяющий возраст ткани. Как вы относитесь к этой теории? Считаете ли и к тому, что главным вопросом является поиск этого неизвестного фактора, и, может быть, последние работы показывают, что он может находиться в экзосомальной микроРНК.
So I call this the Transylvanian approach.
Он летал там, не надо. Я расту в Малахии южнее.
It should be Malachian because it's a little bit more to south.
I see. Okay. My apologies.
Да, извините.
There's very interesting data if you look at adult stem cells. So when we talk about stem cells, people often think about embryonic stem cells, the things that are there in early development that make the whole organism. But your body, almost every tissue, has adult stem cells. And so these cells, when needed, proliferate and replace the damaged tissue. So if you injure your muscle stem cells start proliferating and they make new muscle. And this is actually part of the reason you can build muscle mass. If you exercise, you activate the stem cells. So the problem is that as you get old, the stem cells don't function as well. And so experiments were done where you fuse a young mouse and an old mouse, the bloodstream. So the two mice are stuck together and they share blood. And what they found is that there are factors in the young blood that improve the function of the old stem cells. And there are factors in the old blood that impair the function of the young stem cells. So what that means is that it's possible to identify these factors, and they may be define new therapeutic approaches to protect against aging in various tissues, and maybe extend lifespan. The problem is that we have some idea what's in the old blood that makes the young stem cells not function well. But there's a lot of controversy about what's in the young blood that protects the old stem cells. I'll let him catch up.
Yeah, we have to catch up.
Yeah, sorry. But there's a lot of research now to define these factors in young blood, and they're candidates. And so I think this is a very exciting developing area of research. Yes.
I'm not a biologist, so I will have a question over kind of a rookie one question. As we know, with aging, we see lowering in production of various hormones. And are there any developments, or is there any studies, or does it make any sense to keep the balance of hormones which we see in the young body? So should we keep it as, should we see hormones as in the young age?
This is, first of all, for a non-biologist, that's a very biological question. And a very good one. So this is very controversial. So there have been a lot of controversy over whether men as they get older should take testosterone, and whether women as they get older should take estrogen, or estrogen replacement therapy it's called. And I think this is tells you a little bit about how the question is more complicated, because it depends on what you want to achieve as you get older. You know, I think for men, that testosterone or even growth hormone replacement that people take, growth hormone goes down with aging as well, probably increases your muscle mass. It probably increases virility. But it also probably increases prostate cancer, and probably it may shorten lifespan. So it may shorten lifespan. We don't know. May I say? Yeah. So, you know, it depends on what you want as you get older. You know, it's a trade-off. And so I recommend that people don't do testosterone replacement, because my motivation is to keep people healthy as long as possible. But it's not always so simple. The same thing is true with estrogen replacement. It's protective in some cases and causes risk in others. the more our recent data suggests that it may be the time at which you do estrogen replacement. So if you do replacement immediately as it declines, it may be okay and protective, but if you wait a period of time and then give estrogen, it may be more damaging, but that's speculative still at this stage.
Скажите, пожалуйста, Институт Бака
The
создает
Bach
какие-то
Institute,
документы для разных
do you
целевых
develop
аудиторий,
any
для
kind of documents for different target
возраста,
or audience, target audience, or kind of a ABC instruction or manual? So what should you do not to get old, not to age, or to improve?
The first thing you should do is give money to the Bach Institute.
Первое, что нужно сделать, это, собственно, принести деньги в институт Баха.
I'm teasing, but I'm not.
Я, конечно, может быть, немножко провокационно, да, говорю?
So I think that we're trying to develop strategies to actually educate the public on how to stay healthy longer.
Понимание общества о том, как оставаться здоровым дальше.
And so it's simple and also complicated.
Сложно и просто одновременно.
So I tell you healthy diet, for instance. What do I mean by
Здоровая
that?
диета, да, могу сказать такой термин. Что значит термин?
Because there are many diets out
Есть
there.
масса диет.
There's things like the Atkins diet,
Есть ли диета Аткинса,
where you eat lots of proteins, very low carbohydrates.
Очень мало углеводов.
There's vegetarian diet,
Есть вегетарианские диеты.
where you eat lots of vegetables and fruits and very low meat.
И очень мало мяса.
And there's paleo diet,
Есть диета палео.
which everybody thinks means you can eat as much as steak as possible.
Где рекомендуют.
But that's not true. Hunter-gatherers actually ate mostly a vegetarian diet, probably.
Но на самом деле большинство
And so what should you do?
Соответственно, вопрос в том, что же делать, по какому пути идти.
There's controversy about this, but I think the best data suggests that diets that are very high in vegetables, very high in fruits. Think of meat as a condiment, like ketchup. Eat a little bit, but not too much.
Мясо, его нужно есть, может быть, немножко, но не слишком много.
And eat low dairy and low processed foods.
Нужно есть low dairy.
Low dairy, yeah.
Нужно есть употреблять небольшое количество молочных продуктов и очень небольшое количество такой, ну, что ли, предварительно обработанной пищи.
And that's probably what I think the best data is. You can go into long discussions about exercise, maintaining, keeping stress levels, mental stress down is important. All of these things are easier said than done, but those are the important things. And there's more and more research to try to better define that. So it's a very important question, but I think the main thing to remember is that you need sustainable diet, something that sustainable exercise, sustainable stress management. So you have to. And so the answer for me may be very different than the answer for you, because we have different lifestyles, and I might be able to run, you might be able to swim, and it may not matter as long as you find sustainable program. Yeah.
Not a biologist as well, and I would like to ask you about the drug treatment, about your experiments. Is there any difference the time, the age of the mice when you start the treatment? So if we assume that this works with human, does it matter if we start this treatment since childhood or like before?
Yeah, this is a very important question because you're.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes. So the question is, when can you start the drug treatment to slow aging? Do you have to start very young, or can you start later? And this is very important because you're 25, and I'm almost 50, so I'm more worried about me than you. I mean, no offense. We don't know for sure yet. But the exciting thing is that if you give rapamycin starting at 20 months in a mouse, that's about 60-year-old human. It still extends lifespan by about 15%. If you give the same dose at 9 months of age, So 25. It extends lifespan by 17%. So at least for that drug, it seems to work late.
17 you said.
17. Yeah. So maybe for the TOR pathway you can do it late, but it might be different for every drug and every pathway. So we need to. It's a very important question we don't know the answer to. Yes. This one's like, yes.
Thank you very much for such
You're welcome.
a broad look at this phenomenon we're looking at today. You just said that you're worrying about yourself, which I personally think you shouldn't, because you had a 100-year-old grandma.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
My other grandmother was 99. Too.
Very good genes. And that's what my question is about the person who is our ancestor who lived to a very old age. Like, how important it is to have this person? Is there any research that confirms that people who had a 105-year-old grandma can drink and not care about lifestyle and still?
So do you have a 100-year-old grandmother too, or? So the question is how much of aging is genetic, and how much is environmental? So it's very interesting. So most of the studies suggest that for the average population, it's mostly environmental, maybe 60% environmental, 40% genetics. For centenarians, it's the opposite. It's mostly genetic. So what they did correctly is they chose the right parents. So there's a lot of genetic. So actually, for centenarians, if you ask what they were doing in their 50s, when they're 50 years old, they were more likely to be overweight. They were more likely to smoke. They were less likely to drink alcohol, which is a little bit surprising because moderate alcohol consumption is actually thought to be beneficial for aging. Excess alcohol consumption is not, so don't get confused. They didn't do yoga, they weren't vegans, none of that stuff. So maybe I don't have to worry about it. But this is like 0.01% of the population. So everybody else you need to pay attention to. And there's a lot of research now to try to figure out what the genetic mutations that these centenarians have that protect them from aging. And some things have been identified, but we're still not sure what the details are there. And there's one here and then there.
Yeah. Brian, you mentioned that rapamycin and aspirin efficiency depends on sex. So, and is there any...
It depends on gender, not sex.
Biological gender, not the social gender. And my question is there any other genetics markers or biomarkers that can predict efficiency of the rapamycin or aspirin or other protectors?
Yeah.
And do you know some research about that?
Yeah, so the question is, are there biomarkers of aging that we can use to test drugs like rapamycin and ibuprofen?
Not actually aging, but the biomarkers
of efficacy.
Biomarkers of efficiency of anti-aging drugs.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I have to tell a story. I give public talks at the Buck Institute all the time. And so people in California come to the talks. And so this one woman comes every time. And every time there's a question, she raises her hand. And she says, I've heard that the more sex you have, the longer you live. And so the first time I didn't know how to respond. And by the third time, I was ready. So I said, I've heard exactly the same thing, and we're doing a clinical trial. You can sign up in the back. And so she said, really, where? I'm going to go sign up. So I said, I'm just kidding. What was the question? No, I know. So the idea is, how do we measure the efficacy of these anti-aging drugs? And so from a general perspective, you can look at, try to define biomarkers of aging and see if you reverse those. But for specific drugs, we know what they do. So we can measure, markers for whether TOR pathway is being inhibited or not. In animals, that's very easy. In humans, it's more difficult, but we know physiologic parameters to predict, and we can measure those. So more of that kind of thing needs to be done. You can also, we know what the side effects are, so we can look at those too. So I think the trial, like you saw, which is short-term rapamycin in healthy older individuals, is the kind of trial we need to be doing tens and hundreds of, because those are the ones where we're actually looking at whether you can reverse properties of aging. So I'm hoping that trial that Novartis did is the first of many, not just with rapamycin, but with many other drugs as well. Yeah.
You're saying about studies of drugs, but it's clear is that aging is a complex process, and maybe you have kind of your personal favorites, or maybe you have some fundamental studies which you think like the most promising. And for me personally, it's interesting if you heard about any promising studies concerning brain aging.
So the question is, what's being done about brain aging, and also that aging is a very complicated process, and so how do we look at the breadth of potential approaches to that. And actually that was a big controversy in the aging field like 2 decades or 3 decades ago. Many people said that aging is too complicated. There's no way you're going to make one genetic change to extend lifespan, or there's no way that you're going to give one drug that extends the lifespan of the organism, because aging is many different things. Well, it's not true. At least in the animal models, it's very easy to extend lifespan. So if you look at yeast cells, and you just knock out one gene at a time, 5% of those knockouts, 5, extend lifespan. 120. If you look at worms, same result. And I believe it's going to be similar in mice too, but we don't know because there's not enough data yet. And so I think we need to rethink about what aging means. And one of the most important points is that aging is not under natural selection. Natural selection cares about fitness of the species, how the species competes against other competitors. And mostly that's about reproduction and rapid growth. It's not about living a long time. If you look back in antiquity, the average life expectancy was in the 20s in old times, 3,000, 2,000 years ago. Very few people, there were people that lived to old age, but they were a very small percentage of the population. So slowing aging would not be that beneficial from an evolutionary perspective, because nobody lived long enough to get old. So what that means is we're not optimized to live a long time. And to me, that's promising because it means it's maybe relatively easy to tweak the system to improve that optimization. If evolution has had billions of years to optimize something, it's done a good job. But if something is not selected, there may be a lot of working room to change things, and that may be why it's so easy to extend lifespan in animal models. Now, what we need to achieve in humans is strategies to extend lifespan without doing harm, without reducing fitness, or perhaps we need to learn when to give drugs to get the benefit without the cost. And so it's more complicated, but I think there are going to be multiple successful strategies. Many of these drugs that I talked about protect against brain diseases. So, for instance, rapamycin in mice protects against Alzheimer's, it protects against Parkinson's, it protects against Huntington's disease, and many of the other compounds there's data for too. And then there are also specific strategies to target brain aging. Everything from cognitive stimulation programs, so gaming and things like that to keep your brain active, which are intriguing, but we don't know whether they're successful or not, in my opinion. I think they're interesting. To maybe specific drug targets in the brain that would keep function longer. So I tend to think of things systemically, but people are obviously targeting brain function as well, and they're very promising approaches. Yeah.
I'll ask question in Russian. So, generally speaking, the anti-aging studies, there is one topic which is much less related to pharmacotherapy, but at the same time, it gained Nobel award. I'm talking about telomeres and genome stability in general.
В принципе, фенотип старения, он очень, зависит от многих причин, и по видимости, одной из этих причин стабильность генома и ее нарушение
or its violation with age is one of the
reasons of fact.
But here it's an issue for discussion. But my question, how strong is this contribution of genome stability?
И вот это меня интересует, то есть ваша личная оценка, насколько сильно на сегодня, вот в том фенотипе, который есть
in that phenotype, of aging, what is the role, what is the contribution of genome impairments in both in stem cells and in somatic cells?
Did everyone hear the question?
Все вопросы слышали.
Good. The question is, if you look at chromosome maintenance, the telomere length and DNA damage, does that impact aging? I meant to put a slide that I forgot to include. We wrote a review, several different professors got together and wrote a review in the journal Cell last year, where we talked about the mechanisms that drive aging. So what's happening in the body that makes you age? And genome maintenance is one of the 7 things we listed. I don't think of aging as one thing, but I don't think of it as 25 things either. I think there are a limited number of pathways that change as we get older, that cause aging to happen and increase risk of disease. And some pathways may be more important for some diseases and other pathways for other diseases. Certainly one of them where there's good evidence is the fact that at the ends of your chromosomes and your cells, they get shorter when the cell divides. And when they get too short, they can cause cells to have DNA damage and senesce, which is a specific process they go through to stop dividing permanently. And there's evidence that process is supporting aging, driving aging. So I think that's one of the most important areas to look at. Also, DNA damage that happens when cells as they get old is very important. But other things that are important as well, like proteostasis, protein folding, and inflammation, and a number of other things as well.
просто можно я вдогонку?
May you just continue with the question?
It's fine with me.
Ну просто если, ну как бы с повреждением генома это ведь необратимый процесс.
The genome damage is an irreversible process, unlike other phenotypical processes at the cell level.
И в зависимости от того, насколько он важен,
depending on its importance for aging,
будет зависеть то, насколько принципиально, ну как бы можно комплексно вообще возвращать организм, омолаживать организм.
So if it's a kind of a limiting factor. It's more important it's for aging. If it depending on its role of its contribution will depend on if we can effectively treat aging. Influences this process or not.
First of all, I don't know that it's clear that it's irreversible. It depends on why DNA damage causes aging. But wait, so telomere shortening is reversible in principle. And then the question with DNA damage, with mutation, is whether it's the mutation or whether it's the response that the cell mounts to the mutation that's driving aging. So when you have a mutation, you have a DNA response pathway that gets turned on, and it causes a lot of effects in the cell to try to repair the damage. And in aging cells, that response pathway gets on constitutively all the time. And that may be the problem, more than the actual mutations that are happening. So it's not clear to me how irreversible everything is in that case. Yeah.
Как вы прокомментируете противоположное мнение, что роль мутации вообще практически незначительна? И дело в митохондриях, а именно, когда мы рассматриваем клонирование, мы берем старое ядро, новую клетку со всеми старыми мутациями, со всеми сокращенными теломерами, и у нас рождается новое молодое животное. И все мутации не влияют на старение. Только митохондрии какой-то огромный существенный вклад, больше 80%.
I think that it's not at all clear that cloned animals don't age quickly. So we don't know. I would not agree to that statement. It's born young, but it may have an accelerated aging path. Yeah. So this is the issue. I don't think it's DNA damage or mitochondria. I think it's DNA damage and mitochondria. And so if the intervention affects one or the other, it may be a little bit beneficial, but maybe we have to target both to have maximum efficiency, or also protein misfolding or other things. So, I think you can select a certain piece of data and make an argument for one thing, but if you look at the entirety of the data, it suggests there's several things. And mitochondria is certainly one of them.
Еще пару вопросов.
Couple more questions?
Yeah, okay. 1 and 2 is okay. So, sorry, you can fight over that. I'm fine. Yeah.
Are there any difference between different tissues in terms of aging?
Do you want to?
Differences.
Are there differences between different tissues? Yeah.
Есть ли различия в разных тканях, если мы говорим о старении?
Almost certainly yes. So probably it's very likely. I answer this simplistically, but it's very likely that mitotic tissues that are dividing, like skin and liver, probably have very different aging properties than tissues that are not dividing much, like brain, fat. So it may be that accumulation of protein misfolding and damage is more important in in non-proliferating tissues, whereas DNA mutations or shortened telomeres may be more important in proliferating tissues. So we don't know the answers to that question, but I'm confident in saying that different tissues, they have overlapping but different mechanisms of aging, and we need to understand in more detail which mechanisms are more important in which tissues. I pointed back there.
Насколько плохо для человеческого организма, что у нас чересчур густая кровь? Ну, то есть не как вот, возможно, это для древнего человека было хорошо, а сейчас для нас это плохо.
Чересчур густая, да? How bad? Сейчас, секунду. How bad is for humans to have very thick, very sort of say very viscous blood? Because maybe it was good for so to say for old men, for men in ancient times, but for now. Maybe it's not that bad. And there is a second question. И второй вопрос.
Второй вопрос, что насколько плохо для организма, если мы будем 1500 килокалорий получать вместо 2200, если будем 2 дня в неделю голодать.
And the question is, how bad it is for the body to take those 1500 kilocalories a day instead of 2200. That's what it is. It might be, because it might have some negative effects.
So I don't know how to answer the first question because I don't know data on like blood viscosity and aging. It's an interesting question, but I don't know any data. For calorie restriction, I don't actually encourage people to do this because it's very difficult to eat only 1500 calories and still get all the micronutrients you need. You can't do it by eating 3 Snickers bars. It doesn't work. It's because you're probably missing a lot of key nutrients that does more damage than the benefit you get by reducing calories. So if you go to the website Calorie Restriction Society, you can see people doing calorie restriction. And they have blogs, a lot of them. So they say everything they eat every day, you can see. And what I see when I read them is that there's a lot of guilt. So
a lot of guilt? They feel guilty?
Yeah. So you'll see a sentence that says, I ate 1900 calories today, but I'm going to try to do better tomorrow. So I worry that the stress may be bad. So to not joke, I think that my guess is that if you do it properly, it's probably beneficial, but there may be side effects, like it may have slower wound healing. I have to tell a joke too. And one of the other things about calorie restriction is it's thought to reduce sex drive. I keep coming back to sex. I don't know why.
Что при ограничении колоража ваша либидо также снижается. Я все время к сексу возвращаюсь, кажется, сегодня.
Yeah, and so scientists have been saying this at meetings for a long time. Scientists have been getting up. The scientists who don't do calorie restriction themselves have got up at meetings and say this for all the time.
И ученые, которые на самом деле совершенно не ограничивают себя в диете, постоянно собираются на конференции и обсуждают эти вопросы очень.
And many of the calorie restriction people come to the meetings. So one day, not me, but some scientists said this, and this guy got up in the second row and he said, I've had it! And he walked up and took the microphone from the scientist.
И один из аудитории вскочил и закричал на всю аудиторию, да, I've had it enough.
He stole the microphone.
Он подбежал и схватил микрофон.
And I'm just quoting him, okay? It's okay. I'm just a reporter. This is not my view. He said, I'm tired of scientists saying this. It's not true. It doesn't reduce my sex drive. It just makes me more like a woman. I have to be put in the mood.
Но это сделало из меня скорее женщину. Мне нужно просто настроение.
Three.
I wanted to ask about cryonics. What do you think about this? I understand that as a leader of the prominent institute, you have to be natural. But let's imagine that it's not being recorded.
Well, the first thing I would recommend is if you're going to try cryonics, you should do it while you're still alive and not after you're dead. I have no idea. I mean, I think right now it's more fantasy than reality. In the future, you know, one of the interesting things is that research has shown that in mice, it's possible to put them into a very low metabolic state, to bring their temperature way down, and to almost cause suspended animation for a period of time. So that's very exciting research. People like NASA are very excited about that, because if you want to send an astronaut to Mars, the one way to do it would be to put them into torpor. But so far, those approaches it's not clear that that would work in a human. Yeah. However, there are a number of cases where someone like falls into a lake and they're found an hour later, brought back up and revived. So well, there's a lot we don't know, but at this point I would say fantasy.
Есть генетические болезни, которые приводят к тому, что человек стареет гораздо быстрее.
Resulting in boosted aging, faster aging.
Используют для изучения вот этих болезней людей, которые болеют.
Do you study those people, sick people, so to say, to translate somehow results of those trials to healthy humans? Yeah. So do you study these shortened or faster aging processes, somehow to prevent or to predict?
Yeah.
So say process of aging.
There are a number of disorders that are extremely rare that look like accelerated aging. And there's still a lot of debate about whether the disease mechanisms that cause those progerias are the same disease mechanisms that cause normal aging. So, my guess is the proper way to think about it is that these progerias are called segmental. Segmental, like yeah. And so what that means is maybe no. So what that means is that they accelerate some aspects of aging, but not others. So my guess is if you think about aging as a bunch of different things, that maybe they accelerate some of those, but not all of them. So these kids look like aging in some ways, but not others. So a good example is Hutchinson-Gilford progeria syndrome. 300 kids in the world. Average life expectancy is about 14. They die of atherosclerosis, heart disease, heart attack, stroke. They have other aspects of aging, thin skin, they lose their hair, but they don't have brain aging. They're very precocious, actually. And so we study that disease in my lab for exactly the reason you mentioned. Well, for two reasons. One is I want to help the kids, but another is that we think we'll learn about normal aging. So we're testing a lot of drugs in that context right now, including some of the ones I talked about.
I'm a yoga coach.
I like yoga, by the way. You don't need it if you're a centenarian, but most of us.
Когда вам совет, вам она не нужна, но для большинства это полезно. We know that physical exercise, we could do it in different ways. You could go every day, go to fitness, you could run every day, 2-3 times a day. You can do some Pilates a couple of days, or just you can walk maybe 30 minutes a day.
Yeah.
So which is the most beneficial for longevity?
I think the answer is yes.
Я думаю, что здесь должен быть ответ «да».
I think the more important thing is what can you do
Самое важное,
in your life.
что вы можете сделать, скажем так,
I'm trying to think of the word. My English is not so good. One way to think about it is exercise an obligation or is it pleasure? And if you're doing something that's an obligation, you won't maintain it, or it'll be hard, and it'll increase your stress. If you're doing something that's pleasurable, you'll keep doing it, and it'll reduce your stress. So I think the most important thing is for the individual to figure out what they like and what they and to maintain it. I think yoga is great because it not only is physical but it's mental as well. So that's a very encouraging thing. But I'm a runner, and I find the same thing. It's not just physical, but it's mental as well. It clears my mind and helps me reduce stress when I run. So I don't like to choose between one or the other. What I like to do is tell people to find their own solution to this
то, что я
problem.
обычно говорю, что нужно найти свое собственное решение, которое подходит именно для вас.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have the following question. In your talk, you mentioned about some economical consequences of longevity. Можно чуть громче, извините, не слышно? Have you studied biological consequences of extending lifespan? Not economic, but biological.
Какие именно? Что вы имеете в виду?
What do you mean by that? For instance, the potential consequences, he said, it could be potential negative impact on general, so to say, how to call it, genetic.
Like the rate of evolution or something?
Yeah. So you extend the life of one person, and his genetic funds is, so to say, distributed a longer time. It could impact our.
So there was a lot of thinking that one reason we age is that it gets rid of the old generation, so you can keep recombining the genes and make room for the young. There's in animal models, there's not very good evidence for this. Some people still believe it, but the most aging researchers don't believe that that's true. But I do think that if you could dramatically change the rate of aging, it would have both predictable and unpredictable effects on society, and perhaps the individual. I mean, I don't know what. No one knows what it would be like to be 200 years old. So I'm willing to be the first person to find out, but no one knows. So, but I think the more important thing is that if you look at how rapidly the world is aging and how many older people there are, we have to figure out how to keep them healthy, or we have big problems. So in the short term, it's critical to do this. In the long term, I think it's interesting to speculate about, and maybe that's better done in movies at the moment.
На данный момент этот вопрос лучше рассматривается, скажем так, в кинофильмах, а не в реальной жизни. And there is one more girl. There is one more girl here.
Yeah.
You already had your three. That's
in the previous lecture, we were told that money is the main obstacle. Give us the money, we're going to give you the cure for diseases, and we're going to prolong your life. I'd like to ask you your personal opinion about the main obstacle. Is it the ignorance of the people about what causes the problems? Is it the funding, or is it the actual lack of knowledge, lack of understanding of where we should go?
I think so the question is, which component is slowing down this progress in this field? Is it lack of funding? Is it lack of knowledge? Or is it lack of understanding in the population?
In the graph, Like, what is the highest?
I think lack of funding and lack of understanding are together. You can't separate them. I think if people understood and believed what I said, they would be banging the doors of the NIH down saying, give more money. I also think pharmaceutical companies they're not thinking about this from a realistic perspective. You know, I go to pharmaceutical companies to consult. And they say, we don't know how to make new drugs. We've all made the same thing. Everybody's made Viagra. We need to make something new. Give us a new idea. And so I say, why don't we target aging? And they say, that's risky. How would we test that? How would we get reimbursed? How would we get reimbursed from that from the insurance company? And I tell them, you're crazy. If you have a drug that slows aging, your biggest problem is putting enough guards around the building to protect the drug from people stealing it. So it's a mindset issue. I have hope for me, and I'm old. So yes, I think so. I think if we had the resources, things would go much faster. Yeah. But you need to give them to me and not him. So. Thank you. Спасибо.